Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of the LGS podcast, the Soccer Shorts companion podcast, where we shine a spotlight on local grassroots soccer culture in San Diego, in the United States, and around the world. I'm John Cross, and with me tonight, as always, is Dylan Wilson. Dylan, how are you doing?
I'm doing all right. How about yourself?
I'm doing well. Did you do any interesting soccer related activities this week?
Well, yeah, I went to the SDFC home opener where I saw you and many other people that I hadn't seen in quite a while. So that it was a lot of fun.
Yeah, and we're going to talk about that a little bit more. It is one of the few times that we've seen each other in person in quite a while. We've done some online things, clearly this podcast, but um, first time to actually see each other in person, and like you said, see lots of other people. In terms of on my end, and in terms of soccer shorts, it was a bit of a busy week this last week. Had a big long form interview with Tony Sanchez to get ready for their profile on San Diego Punto Football. That'll be coming up hopefully here at the end of March. So we did that last Wednesday. There was the campaign cup that San Diego Punto Football did with the local YMCA down in their area. The Border View YMCA, I believe, is the actual name of it. Raised a little more than $7,000. I know they talked about it a lot on the Two Balls and a Mic podcast. So if you haven't seen that episode yet, you can get a lot more information there. But I was there filming. It was quite fun. Again, raised a lot of money, and they hoped for it to be an annual thing. And we'll probably be doing a soccer shorts profile on that coming up sometime soon. Got to get some interviews around that. That was really cool that well, I don't want to give too many things away. I'm gonna leave it at there. You should go check out the Two Balls and a Mic podcast, and then some of the things we'll have a little bit later. I don't want to get too much into the weeds on that one. And then, of course, we had the game, which we're going to get to. Well, actually, why don't we go ahead and get to that right now? So, SDFC had its home opener at Snapdragon Stadium this last weekend, and it was in a lot of ways a huge success, and certainly some big missteps as well. So let's let's talk about some of the successes and maybe the tailgate, since we're not really focused on the team and their outcome, uh, but we are on the supporters and what was going on. So we saw each other at the tailgate. So
Yes.
give me your thoughts of the tailgate, the setup, everything that they had there, people you saw. What were your impressions of the very first tailgate for the new union of supporters for SDFC?
Yeah, it was honestly one of the best tailgates I think I've ever had in San Diego soccer space. And I'm not much of a tailgate person. Like I know it's big in like football and baseball, but I've always kind of rather just yeah, like a couple beers in the parking lot, sure, but I'd rather like go to a restaurant near the stadium or something, generally speaking, than tailgating. But this was like a genuinely excellent time. I'm sure the vibes were kind of elevated because it was the first ever game for SDFC, but it was like a family reunion, honestly, for 109. And obviously, there's a lot of new supporters groups that beyond the Chavos and the locals that were there too, and I got to see some folks in there that I knew, but yeah, to kind of focus on what I was getting up to, it was really just felt like a big family reunion for back in the loyal days, and it was just such a great time. I mean, people were slinging great food. There was lots of beer flowing, and it was good to be catching up with people. It's good to be back out doing that again with good people.
Yeah, it's been a very long time since a lot of us have done that to that scale with, I would say, a similar group of people that maybe for you and I that we experienced with the Loyal and with the locals and Chavos. Um, I'd like to give a huge shout out, well, not exclusively, but I know Barra 18 and specifically Osito from that group were instrumental in helping get that tailgate up and running. And just from Osito's experience as well through a different sport with a team that's, once was here and left here and is now in LA. Um, but getting all the tents set up, having the nice little alleyway to walk through, the flags, everything else easy to see from far away as to where the supporters were for their tailgate, a great kind of gauntlet to walk through to really see all the different groups and their tents. And like you said, great food, um, lots of people, lots of music, people having a great time. It was one of the best tailgate experiences I had been to for a soccer match in quite a long time. Very different experience than say Bum's parking lot, which was restrictive in a way because of the nature of the games over at USD,
Hmm.
and you know we had to make do with what we had. This was a little bit more open to doing more traditional kind of tailgating, but also very organized for the groups, and everybody was there, and they were there early. I mean, I was there at 2:30 when they were starting to set up, and there was already a line of people to get in the stadium when the parking lot opened. They got everything set up quickly, and then people just kept coming by. And a lot of people came by to check it out and then left maybe to go check out SDFC's Fan Fest, which was fairly close by. But a lot of people then, gathered around to get ready for the march. So, did you participate in the march, or did you
I did
get
not.
in a different way?
I heard when they were leaving, but it was like 2 hours before kickoff, and I just wasn't ready to go into the stadium yet. So I hung back and then caught up with a few more folks.
Yeah, it was a couple hours before because it takes a lot of time to get people in, and they certainly wanted to be in there, you know, early to start to set the atmosphere inside the stadium. Um, so since you didn't march, and I got some good footage of the march, so we'll be putting that together for something a little later. Um, you certainly. Let me ask you this: how long did it take you to get into the stadium?
Oh, a couple minutes, no issues at all.
Yeah,
But
how
I
what time
came in
did you
about
go in?
20 minutes before kickoff, though.
Yeah,
I like waited quite a while in the parking lot. I did hear that the march had some issues, though. It sounded like.
there were. Yeah, they took a long time to get people in, which is one of the reasons for going and doing the march early to make sure people get in. I've heard some people argue like you should have just waited till 7:10 to go in. It was super easy. Yeah, well, if you got, 1,000 people in your march and they all wait till 7:10 to get in, nobody's getting in till halftime. So, um,
Yeah, that was one of the
something
nice things.
something they clearly need to work on. Not
That was
not
one
the
of the
supporters. Snapdragon Stadium.
Yeah. Well, and I think they're not with all due respect to Wave. I think this was maybe like a bigger crowd than they were used to, at least recently. I know Wave in their early days were selling out or nearly selling out the full stadium, but I don't think that's been the case in a season or two. But I wanted to say that was kind of the flip side and the benefit of the modified setup back at the parking lot versus this was we were all checked in before we were even at the parking lot. So the march was extremely easy. We were
Right.
in the stadium for all intents and purposes. So it's one of those things where there's trade offs, but it was it it I'm sorry to hear there were issues, but I hope it was the first game. You'd hope that they kind of will figure it out.
Well, I mean, there's a couple of things. Yes, the Wave has had very large um, attendance matches, and they have gotten people in much more smoothly, probably because they weren't patting down everyone. And I know a lot of people were complaining about the patting down, but this is, you know,
See, they didn't do that when I came in later, for what it's
right.
worth.
But they did with a lot of the supporters and a lot of the leaders and the first groups that came through. And part of that is, and I think this is something that has been, it's a trade off. You have to, this is where I think the union moving forward is going to have to pick and choose some of its battles. People were very upset. They were upset about being pat down. They were upset about having children patted down. But this was also something that was, I would say, cultivated even by the club a little bit. This encouragement of bringing smoke, not into the stadium for the match, but at other events, bringing smoke, sneaking things in. There has been a cultivation of this kind of behavior. So I was not surprised that there was more severe patting down to make sure people weren't bringing things into the stadium. And in order for that to actually, I'm going to put on my old president hat for right now, but in order for that to get better, there has to be a level of trust that's built up between the union members that go into Snapdragon and Snapdragon security, which is what we developed over time at the parking lot, right? So that is why we were able to do that big, mass coming in. We were already checked in. But if the union has members that then sneak things in, and that happens, and discover they bring in signage they're not supposed to, this is part of like, being a supporter. So do you want that? Do you want to be able to sneak things in? Then you're going to have to expect to be patted down, and it's going to take you 2 hours to get into the stadium, because that is going to be the trade-off if you're going to do that, or if you have a history or a reputation of doing that. But if you can build up the reputation over time that, okay, we do this, but maybe we do it in other areas, but we respect the stadium portion, and they build up that trust over time, they'll be able to make that entrance go a lot more smoothly until someone breaks the trust, and then it's going to go back again. But that's just part of the battle, I think, of the nature of the supporters, and supporters wanting to do some of the things they would like to do, and dealing with Snapdragon security. But that's just going to take time to see how that works out, and that's a lot of it's going to be how the club and how the supporters group want to build that relationship with Snapdragon, because they are difficult to work with. I mean, the bottom line, Snapdragon security is very difficult. They do not go on the trusting side initially, so it almost wins some people to be like, well, if you're going to be such a jerk about everything, then yeah, I'm sneaking stuff in, right?
Yeah.
So there has to be some give and take both ways. But Snapdragon security has been, I would say, from being in the thick of things before, not particularly understanding of supporter groups and how they operate. I think they just think of the college crowds they deal with, and are making decisions based on that, and thinking probably it's going to be worse than what they deal with at a college level.
Yeah, I've had a couple, I'll say, run-ins with Snapdragon security, and they were difficult to work with, absolutely.
All right, so let's the tailgate, I think we both enjoyed and love the tailgate, the experience. I think it's only going to get better, and hopefully the march and the entrance to the stadium will run a little more smoothly. Were you in with the supporters?
I was, yeah.
Okay.
I bounced around the stadium a couple times. Just kind of wanted to get a finger on the pulse of the vibe around the ground, if you will. But yeah, I was down in the local section of the supporters group for most of it.
Yeah, so you were there in the thick of things, and they, I, like a lot of things I do, I was there for the tailgate, and I was filming, and I came home and watched it on television. And they were loud. It was good sound that was coming from the supporters. It did look like, I think, like a lot of people expected, there were a lot of we'll say casuals, people who got the tickets in there afterwards that weren't quite aware of what the culture and things were going to be like. I've heard stories of people who wanted to try to chant and cheer and get the crowd going wherever they were, and other people telling them to be quiet and not be so disruptive and distracting during the game. So those are things that are going to have to evolve over time. And I think especially, this is a very American kind of thing, because we just plop teams down into a city in first division, right? So this culture isn't built over time. I think this has happened to every new MLS team, where you have a core group of supporters, you got a lot of randos in there, and some of them like, wow, this is great, I want to be part of it, and they join up, and others like, yeah, this is where I don't really want to be here. And then they slowly start moving themselves out, and you start to see people on the other side of the stadium like, oh, why am I here? I want to be with them, right? And then they start shifting their seats. And it takes, I would say, probably at least half a season, if not a little longer, to really start flushing all of that out, to build up your your supporter section a little bit better, especially for a team like SDFC that had such a short run up.
Well, and without going too deep into my own personal biases, I think too that they were in a uniquely difficult situation to cultivate this culture because yes, MLS has plopped down clubs in other places, but sometimes more in the slightly more distant past, those have been more or less already existing clubs that have been elevated. I know there's a bunch of legal technicalities, but in other instances, they've managed to piggyback off of support that was already there for another club. St. Louis is a really good example of that. They kind of managed to harness what had been done already. But I think that SDFC found themselves in a pretty uniquely difficult situation in that one, Snapdragon Stadium is already not a great stadium in terms of cultivating that kind of supporters culture. The sound doesn't get trapped in there. The angles aren't steep enough on the grading on the stands, in my opinion. So you don't really feel like you're on top of the game like you did at Torero, for example, or like Providence Park in Portland, which is my personal favorite American soccer stadium. So I think there's that problem. Then also, in stark contrast to the way that MLS was able to piggyback off of a lot of the passion in St. Louis, a lot of the passion in San Diego was not disrupted but fractured by the way this all happened. And so that's not to say it can't come back together, because I think in a lot of ways it has. But once something's broken, it will never be the same as it was, right? Like you can smash a vase and glue all the pieces back together, but it's still not going to hold water the way that it once did. And so I think that in kind of an unfortunate way, the culture that had built up was very deflated. And so it's going to either take rebuilding or reinflation. And that's just a difficult thing to do.
Okay, well, I think those comments make for a perfect transition to our next thing to talk about with the game, which is the thing everybody's been talking about, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's been the elephant in the room. I mean, we had more national media today talking about the goalkeeper chants, and how that really, like, that became the talking point of the opening match. And we're going to get into some of that, but I think you brought up a very interesting point about fractured supporters and then coming together, and plus new supporters, people who weren't involved with SD Loyal, or maybe were involved with another local team, and coming over. So that will take some time to gel, obviously. But I think this club, whether it likes it or not, is going to have to live with the ghost of SD Loyal and some of the things that the Loyal did and stood for. And I do not want to give the impression that the club cultivated this kind of crowd, that chose at times to do the goalkeeper chant during the game. But they certainly tried to distance themselves from the SD Loyal, and I'll even say the wokeness of SD Loyal, and did not embrace that in a way. And now this is a very interesting situation for the club, who tried to distance itself from another local club that this, SDFC coming here caused the demise ultimately. I mean, there were other things, but ultimately the demise of SD Loyal. But SD Loyal, on these kinds of issues, took some very serious stands and were, by a lot of people, not all, but well-respected stands within the soccer community. So
Absolutely.
it
I
is
think,
going to be a challenge for SDFC, who says the words of "we're inclusive," and I don't think they don't mean them. I'm not saying that, but they say the words. But now they got to live up to some actions coming up here as a club, when they effectively tried to distance themselves from a club who took actions along these lines. And that's going to be interesting to see how they handle this moving forward, because I think everybody's in agreement it needs to be eradicated from the game. Well, everybody's not in agreement. I shouldn't say that. There are certainly people out there who have the boys will be boys, and it's part of the culture, and any of those kinds of comments that justify this kind of behavior. And I have some other comments about that I'll do later, but there's certainly some people feel that way. But judged on the outpouring of disgust, disappointment, and stuff over the last few days, it seems like the groundswell is really more towards eradicating this out of the game.
I think so. A lot of things I want to touch on, so we'll see if I remember everything. But I think that generally speaking, especially in America, but also, well, no, okay, I'll just say in America, really. Soccer culture and soccer fandom tends to skew more liberal, like small L liberal. I'm not talking like the Democratic Party or whatever. I'm talking about in terms of like, you know, like a liberal democracy kind of
more left leaning, more progressive.
Sure, yes. Yeah. And so I think with that comes a wider acceptance of all, identities. And so Loyal definitely ingratiated themselves to that aspect of soccer culture in the United States by doing something that a lot of clubs still probably wouldn't do. Right. And so I was very heartened. Steve Brockhoff was the president of the Locals during the Loyal days. Truthfully, I don't know what his title is these days in the organization. I should probably ask, but anyway, not the point. He shared an athletic article and helped shared like a guest pass thing so I could read it because I'm not a subscriber, talking about this very issue. And I was very heartened to see that, to your point, John, whether the SDFC likes it or not, this article pointed to the fact that the legacy of Loyal is something they're going to have to measure up to, whether they want to or not, because there might be a certain aspect of football fandom here in San Diego that found San Diego Loyal too woke. And I cringe as I say that, because to me that's completely ridiculous, but that's my own bias. That crowd who found Loyal too woke might be a crowd that the club wanted to make themselves a little more open to. I think that's been apparent. I don't think that that's a criticism even, really. I think it's an observation. So while that group of people might be a little more okay with what was happening and might be a little more like, oh, whatever, let's move past it, I think what's happening is that the rest of the American soccer community has seen that, not necessarily SDFC or even the ISU yet, but has seen that San Diego supporters culture can do better. And so that's not to say that like they expect better of these new institutions yet, although maybe they do. But I think really what it is they've looked at San Diego and said, like, we know you can be better than this, because we know it too. And we've shown it. So, that was super disappointing. I truthfully didn't even notice it when I was in the stadium. Although, if I'm honest, I had many beers, was not in my best state of mind, but I didn't really even realize it until I went on social media later that night and saw people talking about it.
Well, I watched it on television, and it was clear every single time. When it happened in the first half, I thought, oh, wow. I was like, okay. And the announcers didn't say anything. Nobody said anything. And when it kept happening in the second half, nobody said anything. When they made announcements in the stadium, the broadcast team didn't say, like, nobody really said anything.
And this is another thing I've been made aware of after the game, because again, I didn't really notice it at the time, but it was happening all game. And the 3 warning announcements, the third of which says, after this, we're ending the game, came in like
2 minutes into added time.
Yeah, like 80th, 90th, and 92nd minutes. Or 88th, 90th, and 92nd minutes, excuse me. And I think if it weren't their first game, it would be more definitive to say this. But I think even at the first game, you can say it's almost certainly Occam's razor, right? The most simplest, most obvious explanation is usually the correct one. It felt deliberate, like they were hoping they could just ignore it long enough that they didn't actually have to deal with the idea of ending the game. Because if they had issued the first warning when it actually started, the game would have been discontinued. And so
Right.
I think that a lot of people, especially MLS fans who are not SDFC fans, who have been fans of the league for a while, however long, um, can see right through that too. Can see that only giving those warnings at that time was doing the bare minimum, so they could turn around and say, "Well, look, we did what we said we'd do." So that almost made it extra disappointing. Almost worse than just not issuing the warnings at all.
Yeah. And, this is not the first time, even in MLS, dealing with, and I'll say a goalkeeper chant, not the P word goalkeeper chant. I mean, a decade ago, a little more than a decade ago, MLS was working hard and people from various supporter groups to root out the YSA chant. And are you familiar with the YSA chant? I probably should help that
I mean,
out for any listeners who are not. So,
I mean, not off the top of my head.
like, this, and it really bothers me when I hear people say it's a Mexican thing or it's a cultural thing, or whether people are arguing against it or defending it. I mean, frankly, if you ask me, this is a deeper part of our kind of, I call it the asshole sports culture, where people think it is okay to behave in ways at a sporting event that they would never do in other areas of their life. Whether it's they've had too much to drink or they're with other people or whatever it is, but they decide it's okay to treat other human beings like shit. Whether you're racially abusing them, whether it's a slur, whether you're just spewing hatred and vitriol at someone. We see it in every sport. Like this is not just soccer. This is a particular one that happens with a subset of the fandom in soccer. And I think most people in the US are familiar with it from seeing the Mexican national team play, the men's team play, especially when they play against the US. But it is, to me, a symptom of a deeper problem. And I like what Tyler Heap said of, like, be a better human being, right? No one has a right to berate officials and spew this vitriol at people because they're drunk and they paid a ticket to a sporting event. Like, we shouldn't be treating other human beings like this. Now, we could get into a whole probably hour-long podcast just on banter and what does banter mean, and like where's the line between being an asshole and actually friendly teasing, which is the definition of banter. But to go back to the goal kick example, the YSA is USOC asshole. I mean, English-speaking fans used to do the exact same thing on goal kicks in this country at MLS matches routinely across the league. And not every supporter group, but quite a few of them, the goalkeeper would line up. So instead of like we saw fans at Snapdragon, you get the hands going, for the P word chant, they would do you, and when you kick the ball, because the you would build, and when you kick the ball, it's suck, and then as the ball's in the air, it's asshole. It just hangs in the air, which has a similar kind of cadence to the P word chant. Right? And it took some time to eradicate that out. And that's not, I mean, it's not homophobic, it's not racial, it's just being a jerk. It's just, as the whole, chant goes, it's people just being assholes. And it's this, to me, it is a deeper problem of mostly males usually, and mostly people who've had a bit to drink, feeling like it's okay to be an asshole towards other human beings at a sporting event. And I think that's something we need to really ultimately eliminate from the game, right? We talk about it shouldn't happen between players doing racial things back and forth, but we shouldn't be doing it in the stands either. Just because you paid money and you're a fan there doesn't give you the right to to be hateful towards other human beings.
Well said. I don't really have any follow up to that.
All right. Well, we probably have spent enough time on this because certainly a lot of other people have. I'm going to be very interested to see not only how the club handles this moving forward, and judging by everything I've seen, I mean they are also very interested in stamping this out. I think that was evident from Mikey Varas's comments and Tyler Heap's comments in the post-game presser. And I was happy to see, I wish all of them would have done it, but I was happy to see several of the independent supporter groups that make up the union immediately put out statements, along with the union putting out a statement about eradicating this. I really would have liked to have seen all of them do it to really have that united front. I don't know where, haven't had contact with any of the SGs. I don't know where all that stands. But again, if I put my old president of the union hat on, I think this is a very important moment for the supporters union. And it's going to be difficult on the one hand, kind of working with 8 going on 9 different groups, kind of bringing them all together. But also it should be super easy. It's like Tyler Heaps said in the post-game presser, be a better human. That's really what it's all about. Be a better person. I think everybody can agree on that portion. I think when we get in the weeds of it's a homophobic slur or it's not a homophobic slur, you don't understand the culture, like you're just going in circles. At a deeper level, be a better human at the games. Bring that energy, but bring it to support your team rather than denigrate other people out there on the field. So I'm going to be watching closely to see how the supporters union moves forward with this. I hope personally, as someone who formerly had a stake in all of that, that they come out strong with very strong zero tolerance kind of message. Let it be clear. I know there were some conversations I've seen on the inner circles like, well, adults are adults and they can make their own decisions. Yeah, yes. And these adults who are leaders of this union can make the decision to put forth the message that this will not be allowed. And this should be a welcoming and inclusive place for everyone who wants to be a supporter in that section.
Free speech includes the consequences of the things you do and say.
Right.
It's another good way to put that. I also did want to shout out somebody you did mention, the head coach, Mikey Varas. Excuse me, I didn't know much about him when they hired him. When I found out he comes from the school of Greg Bertholzer and that kind of lineage of US soccer coaching, I was not
cloud
excited.
your judgment there.
it did. I'll be totally honest, but the footballing aside, it's been whatever so far. As a human being, I've been very impressed with him. And yes. I think that whether they meant to or not, SDFC have lucked into a good person who so far seems to be a decent coach too. So I've been very impressed with him. I thought he spoke very well after the game, and I just wanted to give some shout out to him.
Yeah, I would agree wholeheartedly. And I know I'm probably in the minority in this, and maybe it's a product of my age, because I don't think I would have said the same thing in my 20s. But I would rather have a good human being as a coach, and who maybe isn't the best coach, than a great coach who's a terrible human being.
I agree. Yeah.
So yes, I think Mikey Varas had a chance to talk with him and at some things way back in October. And yeah, I think he's a very good human being who wants the best for his players. He's a good person. And hopefully he'll be a good coach also. Yeah. But I think there's so many things to be proud of when you have a good person with strong values, who's willing to come out at the post-game presser immediately and make a comment and a statement about something like that before fielding any questions about the game. I think that said a lot to our soccer community.
And I think for him to end his comments saying as well, and I know we're lingering on this now, but for him to end his comments saying, if you can't go to a game and not say that, don't come.
Yeah, don't come.
Like right. That, drawing a line in the sand, that's what you have to do, and I appreciate it.
Yeah, I agree. So we're gonna see how this plays out over the
Yeah, yeah, we will.
next home game. So we may be talking about this again a little bit and see. Hopefully it's because people stepped up and
Yeah,
change happened before the next home game.
definitely.
Okay, so let's switch gears. I kind of let us go a little bit longer there because we were gonna have like three segments, and this middle segment was going to be the US Soccer AGM, which just finished this last weekend. And frankly, not much happened. Sometimes there's significant news or a vote or something with bylaws or some key thing that's going to affect. And we're looking at it more from a grassroots soccer piece, but there really wasn't. It was pretty boring. The National Council, which if you're super interested in this kind of stuff, which most people aren't, they broadcast it live, but you can watch it on YouTube. Um, it's pretty dry. It's pretty boring. It's just a big meeting. And frankly, looking back on it, it's probably a good thing. And I think, you know, we've gone through the sum and MLS conflicts, the national team things being bundled with MLS and all the support for MLS. And I think we're starting to see the results of those two groups diverging, where US soccer really diverging itself away from MLS a lot more openly in how they're running and doing things. And we don't have the lawsuits that have been going on in the same way that have also dominated conversation. And this was the first time that it seemed like, from what I gather from some of the participants who I've either seen share things on social media or some of my contacts I've been able to reach out to, there were some productive conversations around grassroots soccer and things that aren't going to happen in 2025 and maybe not even in 2026, but more serious conversations around laying the groundwork for, all right, how does promotion relegation work? If USL can get their act together and get it started, how do other people feed into that? How does that work? How does US Soccer help structure that? How do we get, which I was super excited to hear about, as I'm wearing my Open Cup shirt, so that's going to be our last segment, is really this idea we've heard, besides all the teams should be in there and all the MLS teams should be playing, but this idea of a women's Open Cup. I mean, we have so many women's leagues. I think most people aren't aware of all the different leagues that are out there at a pre-professional level. They're probably aware of NWSL and maybe aware of the USL Super League. But USL has a third division league. There is the WPSL. There is the UWS. There's tons of teams that play in the US Amateur Soccer Association. So again, like on the men's side, there are a ton of teams, and really, to me, there's no reason for us not to have a women's Open Cup match. So one of the things that was at the very end of the National Council, they get people to go and stand up and basically give shout outs. Here's something everybody should know, or here's what's happening. And the WPSL commissioner got up there for her little, it's just an open mic thing. You just go up and if you have something to say. And she shared that there's a new amateur cup competition coming this summer for women's soccer. And it's going to pit the WSL winner, which is the Sacramento Storm, I think is their current winner. The USLW, so that's the part of the USL properties, where the Richmond Ivy, the amateur champion, which is the Pan World Women, and then the UWS champion, which is the New England Mutiny. And they're going to do a 4-team tournament this summer, which is taking, some of the teams from each of these leagues to play each other. And as she stated very emphatically, they hope this is the precursor to starting an official women's Open Cup, that this can open the door and be the start of what will become a women's Open Cup. So,
wow, very
thoughts about
yeah,
that.
I didn't know that. Yeah, that's fantastic. It's something I've been crying out for Really, since I started paying attention to soccer and had awareness of the men's US Open Cup, I don't see a good reason that we don't have one. And if I'm completely honest, I feared that it might never happen because of the monetary angle. For much the same reasons that MLS has been trying to move away from the Open Cup, I feared that NWSL might never go towards it. But I would love to be wrong about that. I think it's one of the best competitions in American sports, period, not just soccer. It's got so much history, and it really brings out the best stories. The first like 3 rounds each year are my favorite few weeks in
Oh
American
yeah,
soccer. So
yeah, they're fantastic.
so yeah, if they could get that going on the women's side, that would be phenomenal, because I think the women's landscape is so much less developed than the men's landscape in this country. There's much more room for creativity.
Yeah, and I mean, I think if people don't know already and they looked into it, they would be surprised. I think most people in San Diego are unaware that, well, at least in 2024, we had a whole San Diego division in the WPSL. I think there were 7 teams. And that changes from year to year. Some teams maybe take a year off because again, it's pre-professional kind of soccer. And we had some teams who have been playing in the WSL for years, more than a decade, that they've had teams. I would say most, probably, if you're outside of that immediate loop, people who consider themselves soccer supporters in San Diego aren't really aware of some of those things that are out there. And there is a new WSL team coming, and we might later in this calendar year do some more on some of our podcasts here with our local WPSL teams, since that's what we have the most of in San Diego County. And certainly with Soccer Shorts, we're planning to do some profiles on these teams over time, like a bunch of the other lower league teams on the men's side and supporter groups and everything else that we're planning. But I noticed when I looked at the WPSL site, there is a brand new team that is starting for 2025 in the WPSL. Will be playing in San Diego, and they are the San Diego Dons. Right? So this is basically Cathedral Catholic. They are one of the sponsors. And it got me thinking a lot more. And again, I don't want to get too deep into this because this could be a whole other episode for us talking about this proposal that US Soccer has about taking over Division I soccer from the NCAA. So if you haven't heard of that, just know that that's out there, which a lot of people are like the idea because of how we treat college sports. People are, and all this alumni from college sports, and they still follow their teams. That if you did this in any sport, but you do this in soccer, and you could get a lot of people to stay involved and follow the team, and even if they don't live in the area.
I think people would be more inclined to get involved. People who are maybe it's their, say, Clemson, just off the top of my head, I know is a big soccer
Right.
school. I'm sure there's a lot of people who are like Clemson alum who would be more interested in the Clemson soccer team if they knew it were a professional team that could move up.
It
I
could
mean, the
move up.
same reasons we always talk about pro rel being more enticing. But
Yeah.
I think, yeah, I mean, I love the idea. I've heard the proposal. I'm aware of it. I think it's fantastic. Sorry, go ahead.
No, that's all right. So the reason I bring up the Dons is because they're a new team, and yes, it's Catholic school, but it's a high school, right? And what if all our high schools did something like this? So, Dylan, I know you're not from the San Diego area. You moved here, fairly recently in terms of your life. But what if your high school did a club team that was associated with that? And can you imagine how many people potentially could root for that and cheer? I mean, look at how many people go to high school football, American football matches in places like Texas. If you had a little more structure and this idea of playing pre-professional or maybe moving up, but it was attached to your high school or your junior college or your university or whatever it was, you could start getting a lot more people potentially involved. And as I know we've talked about before, like, and we'll share it on another episode when we'll do a deeper dive on this, but there are so many teams at this level on the men's and women's side, this kind of pre-professional level. They want more than just being an adult club team. Structure's not quite there yet, but we have so many in Southern California. We could do multiple divisions of promotion relegation of teams that are just within a 90-minute radius of each other. So like this, it just got me thinking about that, how that could possibly be a huge thing to, if, and this only works if there's a way to move up the ladder, right? If there's not a way to move up the ladder, there's no real point. But if there is, then there's the potential for schools like this that can tap into their alumni base and really get some strong support for a potential team. And then we could potentially have lots of San Diego County derbies, that you could go and attend and watch, which to me would be
That's the
fascinating,
dream.
especially from a lower league standpoint.
That's the dream.
All right, so that was the AGM, and then that comment about the Open Cup was very exciting. But that kind of gets us to our final segment here about the Open Cup, and just this for us is more just to make sure everybody's aware the Open Cup is coming up in a couple of weeks. Begins on March 18th, 19th,
So 2 weeks
and 20th
from today is the first
round. Yeah, 2 weeks from today is the first set of matches. So Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday is usually the pattern for rounds 1, 2, and 3, I think.
Yes.
I think once we get to 4, then sometimes it stays midweek. I mean, some of that was dictated by MLS not wanting these games on the weekend from before, but last week we asked people to respond what was their favorite USC moment, and I have quite a few things in my notes. I'm going to go through quickly. We'll see how many, Dylan, you remember of any of these. You can jump in. We certainly have, I think because of our connections and people who know us, there's a lot of SD loyal connections. There are a lot of comments about the LAFC match, the Galaxy match, the Seattle, the Albion match. Like there were just lots of local comments. Too many to go into all those as detail, but that certainly was a large segment of comments. We had someone mention Eric Winalda, just his 3 different teams he had taken to at least, I think the Silverbacks in 2014. They were part of the NSL. I think he took them to the quarterfinals. But he took a couple of amateur teams, Cal FC in 2012 and the LA Wolves in 2017, and took them, I think, to the 3rd round of the Open Cup. These are amateur teams that are beating professional teams when we start. This is when the professional teams start getting into this part. So that was someone's comment, just Eric Winalda and his kind of run of different teams. We had someone, we must have some Bay Area fans because we had El Farolito mention, which I know you mentioned last week.
Yeah, that definitely, well, I mean, I am a Bay Area native, so I suppose that does skew that a little. But I think that did have some penetration beyond just Bay Area fans, because the whole burrito story is just kind of fantastic. Like I shared that with some non-soccer fan friends, like people who are aware of the sport but aren't really like into it, and they thought it was fantastic and were like curious how it was going. So I do think that had a little bit more cultural penetration than the average Open Cup run.
Yeah, I agree. Yes. And then along those same lines, we had FC Motown make a run in 2022 that was similar. They're from New Jersey. Someone mentioned that. The Sac Republic making it to the finals also in 2022. We had one from 1997, the San Francisco Bay Seals, their 2-1 upset of the Kansas City Wizards at that point. So it was before they had changed their name. That was with Preki, I believe, was on that team way back when. But that was a big upset. We had some comments about some of the great teams of the past, the Bethlehem Steels and the Maccabi Los Angeles teams that have been, perennial for a long time in the history of US soccer, had been perennial contenders. Even a shout out to the Fall River Marksmen, which I believe have resurfaced and are going to be playing in one of our lower division pre-professional leagues. I can't remember which one off the top of my head. I think it might be the League for Clubs, but I'm not certain about that.
I was scrolling through the list of winners, and there are some teams that have either won or gone very deep in the Open Cup, like back in the day,
Right.
who still exist or in some form or another. And so it's,
Right.
that history is there if we wanted to tap into it, and we kind of broadly.
Yeah. And I think as the Open Cup progresses, we'll find some stories and do a little deeper dive on some of these
Yeah.
teams that are out there for people who are just fans and love chaos, right? You love to see the
Yes.
upsets
Yes.
in
Well,
the
if I
Open
can
Cup.
throw a few first round matchups at you that I'm looking out for.
Well, let me get one more. There was
Okay.
one more that
Yeah.
someone
Sure.
added,
Yeah. Okay. Sounds good.
which I totally forgot about. But Clint Dempsey's 6-match, 2-year ban from the Open Cup. Are you familiar with this? Were you following soccer enough? This was in 2015.
I'm aware of the ban. I'm not fully aware of why.
So this is fourth round, I believe, Open Cup match in 2015 between Portland Timbers and the Seattle Sounders. Right, so already a
Yeah.
rivalry
Mm-hmm.
match. It was 2-1 in extra time. I want to say they were probably like, I don't know, 112 minutes, 111 minutes in. Seattle is already down 2 players, right? So they're playing 9 on 11 and trying to come back and playing at, well, home. I think they were at Starfire or something, but they were the host team. So I forget who it was, but a Seattle Sounder player goes in. I remember watching it. It's hard to tell, but the ref called him for throwing an elbow and hitting someone in the face. So the person got ejected. So now they're down to 8 players. As the Seattle players are getting around the ref, and I think Chad Marshall was the captain as he's coming to talk to the official. The official has out his notebook and he's getting ready to write into it. And Clint Dempsey takes the notebook out of his hand. It falls to the ground. He picks it up off the ground and he rips it. And so he got a yellow and then made some comments and got a red and received a 6-match, 2-year ban for that. And I totally forgot about that until someone brought that up. But there's video of it. You can find it on YouTube.
I will look that up later. Yes,
but
definitely.
it was a team that lost their shit at the end of a match. And I cannot remember what happened, like when Portland scored the goal or some of the other testiness that was there, clearly because 2 Seattle players had already been ejected. That part I don't remember. I just remember the last part pretty extensively, especially because it became a 6-match, 2-year ban, basically whichever was longer. It depended, how many games Seattle actually played, because they could only play 1 game each year. So that could have effectively been a 6-year ban. And I don't think Clint Dempsey ever played in the Open Cup after that.
I don't believe he did. I think that's like a stat that people bust out sometimes.
Yeah.
And, a guy actually, well known for his calm demeanor, to be fair.
Right. There was one last one, and someone had put in a comment that they don't have one because there isn't a Women's Open Cup yet. So another shout out for a Women's Open Cup. And hopefully, as we said a few minutes earlier, we see that come to fruition over the next couple of years here in some form, at least. Okay, let's talk about the first round.
Yeah. Okay, so the ones I always like to look out for are lower league clubs hosting clubs that are above them. So I'm just going to go through and list all of the ones that I found quickly that are in that instance, and then a couple more that I'm looking at for personal reasons. So
and before you do that, just to make sure everybody knows, and this is a slight change from, we might have did this last year for the Open. I don't remember, but it wasn't always this way. But this year, I think they did it last year, but this year for certain, it's 32 amateur teams versus 32 professional teams. So none of the professional teams will be matched up together in the first round, and none of the amateur teams will be matched up together in the first round.
Right.
Now, some people don't like that because they feel it's rigged for the professional teams,
Well,
but
yeah.
other teams and other amateur teams absolutely like it because it gives the chance for lots of potential upsets. So when we say professional, we're talking in this round Division 2 and Division 3 teams that are coming in to face the amateur teams that have qualified through the various methods before we get to what we now consider the Open Cup proper. All right, go ahead.
Right. So in the first round on Tuesday, the 18th, we have Sarasota Paradise of USL League 2 hosting FC Naples of USL League 1. So that's fourth tier hosting a third tier there. We have New Jersey Alliance of the UPSL hosting Chattanooga Red Wolves of USL League 1. So another 4v3 there. We have FC Motown of NPSL hosting Westchester SC of USL League 1, another 4-3. Asheville City of League 2 hosting Greenville Triumph of League 1, another 4-3. Here's a 4-2. We have Westchester United SC. So that's not Westchester SC. This is West Space Chester Space United SC. Different things. Of the USA SA/USLPA hosting Loudoun United of the USL Championship. So that's a good one. And then we also have Tulsa Athletic of the UPSL, who I think are historically probably one of the most successful teams at that level.
They have been recently, yes.
Yeah, at least recently. Hosting FC Tulsa of the USL Championship. So that's one I will definitely be watching out for just because Tulsa Athletic have been a bit of giant killers in the past, and I know that they match up with FC Tulsa in the early rounds very regularly. So this is what you would call a cup derby, I think.
Yeah, sorry.
Go ahead. No, go for it.
I was going to say, for those who maybe aren't as familiar, that the Open Cup tries to stay hyper regional in the early rounds to limit travel. So you do get a lot of these year after year matchups in a lot of teams. Just like in our case, we had the San Diego Loyal played Albion, a couple years in a row for the first match. So it kind of depends, who wins which matches and when your particular team may come into the mix. But they're all, barring a few exceptions that occasionally happen, because I remember one year we had Oakland Roots going all the way across the country to play a match, but they try to keep them as hyper regional as possible so people can attend the games.
Yeah, and I mean, they're some of the best games I've ever been to, just in terms of atmosphere. So on Wednesday, the 19th, we have Appalachian FC of the NPSL, which is a big fan favorite because of their Bigfoot logo, or big crest, I should say. Right, Sasquatch crest. So Appalachian FC of the NPSL hosting the One Knoxville of League 1. So that's, again, 4v3. We have... where'd it go? We have Little Rock Rangers of USL League 2. I'm not familiar with them, but hosting Birmingham Legion of USL Championship. I believe there's efforts to get a League 1 team in Little Rock. I don't know if that's related to this at all, but cool for them. I don't think a lot of pro soccer happens in Little Rock, so that'll be a big match for them there. And then the last one we have on Wednesday is another one I'm personally watching out for is Ballard FC of USL League 2 hosting Spokane Velocity of USL League 1. That is one that happened last year as well in Spokane's first season, or maybe 2 years ago it was. Ballard FC, for me personally, I have a friend who lives in Ballard, which is a neighborhood in Seattle, who is a big Ballard FC fan, and I just love what they're doing there. It's a very community-focused project. Their shirt sponsor and primary sponsor is like literally a neighborhood brewery in Ballard. So like they're very, very hyper local. Love what they're doing. Great kits. And they won USL League 2 national championship in their second season. So it's a well-run operation on and off the field. So anyway, I keep an eye on Ballard FC every year. So hopefully they can overcome Spokane this year. I think it was either last year or 2 years ago they played, like I said, in the first round. And Ballard took them all the way to penalties and truthfully should have won the game. So if you're looking for upset alert, I think Ballard hosting Spokane is a good one. And then finally on Thursday, we have Long Island Rough Riders hosting Charlotte Independence. So there's a bit of travel there. That's League Two hosting League One. And the last one is Flatirons FC of League Two hosting Union Omaha of League One. Union Omaha had a very deep cup run a couple years ago. They made it to the quarterfinals as a third division team. So those are all of the instances in the first round where a team is hosting a team in a division at least one higher than them. I didn't list ones where they're in the same division or anything. So those are all your real big upset alerts. Not to say teams can't win on the road, but it is a little more fun when they do it in front of their own fans.
Sure. Yeah, always. All right. Well, thank you for that. And those are certainly a lot of games that.
And sorry, I did want to shout out one more game for personal reasons. This is not matching the multi-level matchup, but Rail Monarchs. Well, they're hosting. They're a NBS or a Next Pro team, so Tier 3, hosting El Farolito, who we touched on earlier. Who I think just for reasons for the culture, we'll have to keep an eye on. So that is on Wednesday in Salt Lake City. Or Harriman, Utah, excuse me.
All right, excellent. So I'm sure next week we'll have a couple little updates as well, especially in terms of TV and where you can watch these. And, we do not have any matches in San Diego. I mean, that's a product of MLS for one, because really we should have had, SDFC should be playing in it. And again, that's a whole other conversation to get in the weeds of that, but we'll sidestep that one for right now. We had a UPSL team, the San Diego International, who were close. Right? They went to the final playoff match against Laguna United, I believe was the team, and they lost that match last December. I was at that match there in Mission Bay. And again, if you've never been, it's fun. It's fun to go to an Open Cup match. I know we have quite a few people in the San Diego area who love supporting the Open Cup and really make an effort to get out and go and do a road trip and attend some matches. So we have, and we may get, I know Ken Garton is one of them. We may get him on the show. We tried to get him on this week, but we couldn't get schedules to work out. But I know he is planning to go to some open round games, so I'm not sure where in Southern California. We do have some Southern California matchups, so I'm not sure where he's planning to go. And with the likes of, Orange County and some other teams coming online in the next few rounds, there's more and more chances of some local matchups and potentially to see some players who have some San Diego ties.
Definitely. Have you reached out to Matt Hannon? He goes to a lot of these early round games with his family.
I have not. Well. That would be another good person to reach
out
to. I'm going to make a note of that.
Because he brings his kids and his wife goes with him too. So they make it a whole thing when they go to these games.
I know I have it just as I know we're having a side conversation here, but Matt's someone I need to talk to about our local Celtic supporters group as well.
There you go. Perfect.
Because we will be doing a profile on them at some point with Soccer Shorts. So we got a lot of things lined up. We got to figure out which we're actually doing this year and which are getting bumped to next year. But very excited for those. Very excited for the Open Cup coming up.
Yeah,
can't wait. Like you said, the first 3 rounds of the Open Cup are usually the most fun, filled with lots of crazy games. It'd really be nice if someone like Football Americas or somebody does the big whip around. I'd love to see the Golazo Network or someone do it. I have not heard that there is a TV contract at the moment. I hear there's something in the works as they move forward as we get towards the later rounds. But usually everybody streams things anyway, so you can find them on YouTube if they're not being covered on ESPN or Paramount.
Right, the US Soccer has streamed the first few rounds the last couple of years, right?
Yeah, they have also streamed them. So there are ways to find these matches.
Do it.
It is a
Support the
lot of
U.S.
fun
Open Cup,
opening up a
people.
bunch of
Yeah.
windows.
Yeah. You know what? I truthfully just whenever the first game starts on those days, I just put it on in the background. If I have to mute, I'll mark in whatever.
Right.
You got to get the views in to support the cup, people.
Yes, and we all should be supporting the cup. It is an important part of soccer history in this country, and has the potential, especially with the way things are shaping up. And this is again something we'll dive into as this year goes with our podcast, for the changes in the landscape of lower league soccer, and how things are, in my opinion. And I know there's people who don't agree with me, but we are moving closer and closer to the ability of having some true effective promotion relegation, especially at the pre-professional level, which will only help that build. Because I think that's one of the biggest problems is trying to do pro rel and have a pyramid is where's your base of the pyramid?
Yeah, you
Right.
can't
So
start from the
that
top.
base is starting to shape up. And again, we'll dive into that in future episodes. But that base is starting to shape up. And if that can work in conjunction with something like the USL and what they're trying to do, and now there is a base of teams, then there's a structure there to move those up if they're successful, and we can start to build a pyramid based on merit. Then yeah, there's a lot of really cool things that can happen, and especially in terms of the Open Cup and cool stories. So looking forward to it.
Definitely.
All right, so Dylan, we're about wrapping up. Any plans you have for soccer related plans for the week coming up?
I've heard talk that there might be a watch party for the SDFC game this weekend, so I might check that out. I also believe this upcoming weekend is opening weekend for the USL. I could be wrong about that, but
God, I can't remember this weekend or next weekend.
Let me check.
Might
Yep,
be
it is
this
this
weekend.
weekend.
Yeah.
So I will absolutely be tuning in for that. Oakland roots are going to have my attention this year. I grew
All
up in
right.
Oakland, but also those kits are. I don't know if you saw their away ones.
The
this year,
Oakland A's ones.
that definitely
Yeah.
made me feel some kind of way. So
Okay.
I will give the USL my love and support this year for sure. So
Yeah,
this weekend I'll be doing that.
If you haven't checked out those kits, look for them online as well for Oakland
They're
roots.
totally sold
Oakland
out for what
A's.
it's worth. Yeah.
Yeah, I bet. They're Oakland A's tribute kits,
Yeah.
and which is something a lot of people talked like maybe they would do. The Loyal would do a Padres one, which never really happened. But yeah, Oakland roots have, I would say, with almost every kit, pretty much knocked it out of the park.
Well, and they're Charlie these days too. So
yeah, very very true to the communities. So
yeah.
Those are great, and they're not the only ones. There's tons of stories like this in lower league soccer that hopefully we can start bringing some of those to people's attention and start generating some interest here at the lower league level. All right. Well, now that you mentioned that, I will probably be tuning into some games too. I might go to one of these watch parties purely for SDFC match coming up, purely from a soccer short standpoint, because I have quite a few people I still need to talk to and make connections for future episodes. So it'll be a good excuse to get out there and a place where a lot of people are all at once, which makes it easy for me.
Yeah, definitely.
But also interviewed Tony last week for the San Diego Punta football episode. I have an interview with Chiva coming up. For us, we're recording on Tuesday, so tomorrow on Wednesday, and then I got to get Abraham, and then I have lots of B-roll footage, and we'll start cutting and editing and putting the episode together. So hopefully we still have it ready by the end of the month. So that's kind of my stuff that we're looking at. Just a couple of program notes as we're getting ready to wrap up. Remember, we do a lot of things and partner with San Diego Punta Football. So Two Balls and a Mic, you can always catch Mondays at 8 o'clock. Find it on YouTube or find it later through all your major podcasting platforms. Soccer's Overtime, which soccer season is still going, so they also go on Tuesdays at 6. And for us, local grassroots soccer, for our podcast, excuse me, you can find us for our podcast here on our YouTube channel. You can also find us on all major podcasting platforms. And of course, this whole podcast is in support of the Soccer Shorts documentary series. And you can find those Soccer Shorts documentaries over at BPD Soccer Shorts over on YouTube. If you hadn't had a chance to check those out, go and check those out. I have made contact with the local Liverpool group, which I think was episode 3 or third episode of Soccer Shorts. We did back in 2019. So we're going to try to arrange schedules to get them on a future episode to do the same thing we did with Paul last week, kind of bring them on, talk about the episode, see what's changed over time, and get some of their takes on who we should profile on Soccer Shorts in the future. So look for that probably this month coming up on a future Soccer Shorts episode. Okay, that's it. I think all that I have. Dylan, do you have any final comments?
Nope. I just really looking forward to the Open Cup. It was kind of fun to really get into the weeds and talk about it a little bit. I hadn't really thought about it too much yet, but I realized that it is that time of year. We got the Open Cup and March Madness, two of my favorite things.
Yeah.
So delete your X accounts, join BlueSky. Those are my closing words.
Yeah, and you will only find us on BlueSky. We're not doing Musk or Meta, and Musk or Meta, and only BlueSky. And you could do us a favor here by helping share the word of this podcast, because frankly, I'm a little not so great at social media and getting things out. So, and plus we're only on BlueSky. So anybody who's listening out there, if you could help spread the word and encourage people to get off those other platforms right now. We'll be doing BlueSky only, at least for the immediate future. All right, Dylan, thank you very much for helping co-host as always. And
thank you. We'll see you next week.
Yeah, we'll get everybody here, and we will see you again for another episode of the Local Grassroots Stories podcast next Tuesday. Good night.